They built their dream house 6 inches onto my land, and that 6 inches ended up costing them more than $100,000. Not because I'm petty, not because I woke up one morning looking for a fight, but because sometimes the smallest line in the dirt is the only thing standing between peace and being walked over. My name's Daniel Harper, and I own a narrow 5-acre strip of land just outside a little town called Mill Creek Hollow, about an hour from Nashville. My dad bought it back in 1987, when this whole stretch of county road was nothing but scrub woods, a few cattle fences, and a gas station that closed at sunset. He paid $48,000 for it and thought he was overpaying. That land runs long and skinny from the road all the way back to a shallow creek that dries up most summers. It's not glamorous. No rolling hills, no postcard sunsets. Just oak trees, cedar brush, red clay soil, and a gravel drive that crunches under your tires in a way that feels like home. When Dad passed, the land came to me. I never built a big house on it, just a modest cabin I renovated over time, and a workshop out back where I tinker with old engines. The property lines are marked with iron survey stakes, the kind hammered deep into the earth by a man who knew what he was doing. Everything's recorded at the county office. Clean title, clear boundaries. Out here, that's sacred. For years I didn't have neighbors. The parcel next to mine sat empty, 5 acres of trees and weeds and the occasional deer passing through. I liked it that way. Quiet, private, predictable. Then the city found us. The couple who bought the lot next door were named Evan and Claire Reynolds. Early 30s, both remote tech workers from Portland. They showed up one Saturday in a shiny black SUV that looked like it had never seen dirt in its life. Claire had on those wide-brim hats you see in home decor magazines, and Evan wore boots that still had the price sticker residue on the sole. They introduced themselves the first week. "Hey neighbor," Evan said, flashing a smile that felt practiced. "We're building our forever home." Claire chimed in, "We've been dreaming about this for years. Fresh air, slow living, you know." I nodded. I've got nothing against dreams. But I've learned dreams can get expensive when they don't respect reality. Within a month, the trees started coming down. Big equipment rolled in. Concrete trucks, foundation crews, survey flags flapping in the wind. They hired an architect out of Atlanta and a contractor who drove a lifted truck with his company logo plastered on both doors. Every day there was noise, backup alarms, and men shouting measurements. And every night, Claire posted about it online. I know because my sister sent me the link. "Danny," she said over the phone, half laughing, "your neighbors are influencers." Apparently, Claire had a growing Instagram account documenting their rural reset. She filmed the clearing of the land, talked about reconnecting with nature, about building intentionally, about honoring the land. She'd stand in front of the foundation trench holding a coffee mug and say things like, "We're so grateful to steward this beautiful property." That word stuck with me. Steward. One afternoon, I was walking the edge of my property, something I do every couple weeks just out of habit, and I noticed the concrete forms for their foundation looked close. Real close. Close enough that my gut tightened before my brain caught up. I walked to the iron stake marking the boundary line. It was exactly where it had always been, rusted but solid. Then I looked at the corner of their foundation. It was over. Not by feet, not by yards, but by about 6 inches. The concrete footing clearly crossed past the invisible line that separated mine from theirs. 6 inches. I stood there longer than I care to admit, staring at that edge of gray concrete like it had personally insulted me. It would have been easy to shrug it off. 6 inches doesn't sound like much. You can lose 6 inches in a bad haircut. But land isn't measured by feeling. It's measured by lines, and those lines matter. I walked over to where Evan was standing near the portable toilet, looking at blueprints. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Got a minute?" He smiled again. "Sure thing, Daniel. What's up?" I pointed back toward the corner. "Your foundations crossed the property line, about 6 inches onto my side." He blinked at me like I'd just told him his car was floating. "That can't be right," he said, already pulling his phone out. We checked everything. He opened some property app, zoomed in with 2 fingers, showing me a satellite image with colored lines. "See? We're good. The line's right there." I looked at the screen, then at him. "Those apps are off by 10, 15 feet sometimes. They're not survey grade." He chuckled. "Man, those old stakes out here shift all the time. Frost, rain, who knows? We had someone look at this when we bought the place." Did you get a licensed survey done? I asked. He hesitated. We had the lot lines from the county records. That's not the same thing. He sighed, like I was complicating his Saturday. Look, we're already poured. Even if it's a few inches, it's not hurting anything. Not hurting anything. I felt something shift in me right then. Not anger, not yet. More like a warning bell. It's my land, I said quietly. 6 inches or 6 feet. He gave me a tight smile. Let me talk to the contractor. I'm sure it's fine. But construction didn't stop. The forms came off. The framing went up. And that 6 inches of concrete sat there, hardening into something permanent. I went back to the stake a week later with copies of both our recorded surveys in my hand. And that's when the real conversation started. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to be a friendly, neighborly misunderstanding. When I walked back over there with those surveys folded under my arm, I wasn't looking for a fight. I was still hoping for that small-town moment where two grown adults look at the same piece of paper, nod, and fix the problem before it turns into something ugly. Evan was standing on the framed subfloor, talking to his contractor, a thick guy named Marty, who looked like he'd built half the county. Claire was filming something near the driveway, narrating into her phone about reclaimed wood and intentional design. Evan, I called out. He climbed down, brushing sawdust off his jeans. Hey, Daniel. Everything good. I handed him the copies. These are the recorded surveys from the county office. Yours and mine. The iron stake hasn't moved. Your footing crossed the line. He barely glanced at the papers before handing them back. We're way too far into this to start second-guessing everything. It's not second-guessing, I said. It's a boundary. He exhaled slowly, like I was a client asking for a refund. Okay, let's be practical. What do you want to do here? I want you to move it, I said. Or tear that section out and re-pour it inside your line. Marty laughed under his breath. Not loud, but loud enough. Evan shook his head. That would cost a fortune. We're already framed. We'd have to redesign the whole corner. That's not my problem. He studied me for a second, like he was recalibrating who he thought I was. Then his tone shifted from friendly to transactional. What if we just adjust the line, he said. We can pay for a boundary amendment. Shift it 6 inches over. I'll cover all the fees and give you, I don't know, $1,000 for the trouble. $1,000. For a piece of land my father bought before Evan was probably out of middle school. It's not for sale, I said. It's 6 inches, he replied, his patience thinning. You'd never even notice it. I notice it, I said. And it's not about the inches. It's about you pouring concrete on land that isn't yours. Claire had wandered closer by then, phone lowered but still recording. We're not trying to take anything from you, she said, softer, almost wounded. We just want to build our home. We thought everything was right. You thought, I said. You didn't verify. That didn't sit well. Evan's jaw tightened. So you're really going to make us tear down part of our house over this? I'm asking you to fix what you built on my property. He stepped closer, voice dropping. You're being unreasonable. That word, unreasonable. It hung in the air between us like humidity before a storm. I left without another word, but that night I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Part of me wondered if I should let it go. 6 inches wouldn't change how I used my land. I wasn't planning to build along that exact line. But here's the thing about boundaries. If you let one slide because it's small, you teach people that your limits are flexible. And I'd spent too many years in my life learning the hard way what happens when you let people inch past your lines. A week later, framing continued. Walls went up. Windows were delivered. No surveyor showed up. No correction was made. So I called a lawyer. Her name was Margaret Collins. Late 50s, sharp as broken glass. The kind of attorney who didn't waste words. She met me in her office downtown, surrounded by shelves of property law books that looked like they'd been opened 1,000 times. Start from the beginning, she said. I laid it all out. The stake, the app, the offer, the refusal. She leaned back in her chair. Did you give them written notice? Not yet. Good. We'll do that. Within a week, she sent a formal letter demanding they cease construction immediately and remedy the encroachment. Clear language. No emotion. Just facts and consequences. Construction did not stop. Instead, I got a letter back from their attorney, a polished guy from Nashville named Thomas Avery. The letter said the encroachment was minimal, caused no material harm, and that forcing demolition at this stage would be, and I quote, unconscionable. Unconscionable. Margaret read that word out loud and smiled without humor. They poured first, and ask questions later. That's not unconscionable. That's negligent. Their counteroffer was $5,000 for a permanent easement. An easement, for anyone who doesn't know, is basically legal permission for someone to use your land for a specific purpose. In this case, they wanted the right for that corner of their house to sit on my property forever. $5,000. Margaret looked at me. If you accept this, it's done. You'll never get that piece back. I stared at the ceiling in her office for a long moment. File it, I said. So we sued. And that's when things got strange. Because while we were filing motions and gathering documents, Evan and Claire were finishing their dream home. The siding went up. Landscaping started. A wraparound porch appeared. String lights were hung between cedar posts. And Claire kept posting. She gave a full house tour video titled From City Chaos to Country Peace. She talked about community, about respect for the land, about gratitude. Comments poured in. People calling them brave, inspiring, saying they deserve this life. Meanwhile, I was paying hourly legal fees and walking past that corner of their house every day, feeling like it was leaning into my yard on purpose. One afternoon, about 4 months into the lawsuit, Evan came over. He looked tired, less polished. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "You could have stopped it before the concrete dried," I replied. He ran a hand through his hair. "We've sunk almost $800,000 into this house. Our lender's nervous. This lawsuit is scaring people. I warned you. It's 6 inches, Daniel. And it's my 6 inches." He looked at me like he couldn't decide whether I was stubborn or insane. "What do you actually want?" he asked. "I want you to understand that you don't get to build first and negotiate later." He shook his head slowly. "You're going to burn goodwill in this town over this." That almost made me laugh. Goodwill doesn't come from surrendering your property. He left without another word. The case dragged on for 8 months. Depositions were taken. Surveyors were brought in. And here's the part that changed everything. The license survey confirmed exactly what I'd said from day one. 6 inches over the line. Clear as daylight. Margaret built the argument carefully. They had been notified early. They had chosen to continue. That choice mattered. And as the court date approached, I realized this was no longer about 6 inches of dirt. It was about whether consequences still exist when you have enough money to assume they don't apply to you. The hearing day arrived gray and cold. Evan wore a suit that didn't quite fit right. Claire looked like she hadn't slept. I felt strangely calm, because at that point, whatever happened, I knew one thing for certain. I hadn't moved the line. The courtroom wasn't dramatic the way TV makes it look. No gasps, no pounding gavels, just fluorescent lights, wood paneling, and a judge who looked like he'd seen every version of this story before. Judge Holbrook was an older man, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of presence that doesn't need to raise its voice. He had read everything. That much was obvious. When he spoke, he didn't fumble for facts. He already knew them. Margaret laid it out clean. Timeline. Notice. Continued construction. Licensed survey confirmation. Intentional disregard. Thomas Avery argued equity. Hardship. Disproportionate harm. He used words like fairness and community impact. He emphasized how much Evan and Claire had invested. How tearing down a structural corner would be financially devastating. At one point he said, "Your Honor, this is a minor encroachment. 6 inches. It causes no functional interference to Mr. Harper's use of his land." I watched the judge scribble something on his pad. When it was Margaret's turn for rebuttal, she didn't raise her voice. She just said, "The size of the encroachment is irrelevant when the decision to ignore notice was deliberate." Deliberate. That word sat heavier than unconscionable ever did. Then Judge Holbrook leaned back in his chair and looked directly at Evan. "Mr. Reynolds," he said calmly, "when were you first informed of the boundary concern?" Evan swallowed. "Before the slab was fully cured." "And you continued construction?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" Evan hesitated, and for a second I almost felt bad for him. Almost. "We believed it was minor and could be resolved later," he said. The judge nodded slowly. "Resolved later by whom?" No answer. The room went still. A week later, we received the written ruling. I was sitting at my kitchen table when Margaret called. "You're going to want to hear this," she said. The court found that the encroachment constituted willful negligence. Not an accident. Not a misunderstanding. Willful negligence, because they had been warned and chose to proceed anyway. The judge determined that the 6-inch strip was essential to the legal footprint of the home. Without securing rights to that portion, the structure was technically non-compliant. He gave them two options. Option 1. Pay $75,000 in damages to purchase a permanent easement for the encroached area, plus all of my legal fees. Option 2. Enter into a mandatory annual easement agreement at $20,500 per year, adjusted for inflation, in perpetuity. In perpetuity. Margaret let that sink in before she added, "Your legal fees are just over $18,000. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just stared out the window at the tree line. "So," she said gently, "how are you feeling?" I surprised myself with the answer. Tired. Not triumphant. Not vindicated. Just tired. Evan tried to negotiate. Of course he did. There were motions filed asking the court to reconsider the amount. Arguments that the valuation was punitive, that it exceeded market value. Judge Holbrook didn't budge. In his response he wrote, and I remember this clearly, the defendants elected to assume risk when they proceeded after notice. The consequences are not punitive. They are the natural result of that choice. Natural result. That's what this had always been about. A few weeks later, Evan came to my door again. No contractor. No lawyer. Just him. He looked older somehow. "We're taking the lump sum," he said quietly. 75 plus fees. I nodded. "I never thought it would go this way," he added. "You could have fixed it when it was wet concrete," I said. He gave a small, humorless laugh. "Claire says you ruined the story." "The Instagram story?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. "We thought you'd work with us." "I did," I said. "You just didn't like the terms." There was a long pause between us, not angry anymore, just heavy. "Do you hate us?" he asked suddenly. That caught me off guard. "No," I said honestly. "I don't. But I won't be ignored on my own land." He nodded once, then turned and walked back across the gravel. They wired the money within 30 days. $75,000. $18,000 in legal fees. Plus they paid for a new survey, updated documentation, recording fees. By the time it was done, the total was just over $103,000. All because of 6 inches. The irony is, I didn't suddenly feel richer. The land didn't look different. That corner of their house still sits where it sits, legally now. The easement paperwork is filed with the county, stamped and permanent. Claire stopped posting as much. When she does, the captions are less poetic, more guarded. We nod when we pass each other on the road. That's about it. Sometimes I walk out to that iron stake and rest my boot against it, just to remind myself it's still there. Still where it's always been. People in town have opinions, of course. Some say I was right. That property rights matter. That if you let one person slide, it sets a precedent. Others say I was stubborn. That I could have taken the 5,000 and moved on. That neighbors should compromise. Maybe they're not wrong. But here's the question I keep coming back to, and I'd genuinely like to hear what you think. If someone builds on your land after you warn them, and then tells you it's too expensive to fix, whose responsibility is that? The person who crossed the line, or the person who refuses to erase it? Because this wasn't about punishing a dream. It wasn't about money. If it were, I would have countered with a number from the start. It was about something simpler. Boundaries only work if they're real. So I'll leave you with that. Was I defending what was mine, or did I let pride turn 6 inches into a war? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you believe actions should have consequences, especially when it comes to land, law, and accountability, hit subscribe and stick around. Out here, lines in the dirt still mean something. And sometimes, they cost a lot more than anyone expects.